Hey guys, so I threw together this quick video as a way to show rather than just tell everybody how to take a piece of furniture that might be older or outdated and give it a newer, fresher look for your space. I get asked a lot of questions, and even though I answer them, I still feel like I could be explaining a little bit better or more. And when you're talking about paint as a medium, sometimes it's just really easy. It's easier, and it's a little bit more thorough to be able to show how the process is done. So I've chosen a project that's going to be pretty simple and straightforward while still having a couple of fun little techniques done to it. And I should be able to hit on pretty much all the questions I've been asked with this video. But if I don't hesitate to contact me, give me a shout, email, and I will get back to you with an answer. So with that being said, we're going to do this little desk here, and I chose a desk because it's a more common piece of furniture that you're going to find in your house. It's smaller, it's a little more straightforward. The first thing that you want to do when you start with your piece of furniture is open your doors and your drawers and make sure that they glide smoothly, that they're not sitting wonky. And if any repairs you find, actually, I usually keep a Post-it always handy on my card there, and it's good for just taking measurements, writing down repairs that you might need to make later, any supplies that you would need to pick up. It's just a good place to start is inspecting your piece and jotting down any measurements or notes that you need. For the sake of this video, we're going to say that you've made your repairs and they're all done. You want to take all of your doors and drawers off. It is so tempting to leave them on and paint around them, especially with bigger, more complicated pieces. I cannot tell you how much easier it will be for you in the long run and how much smoother everything will go if you just take them off. What I do, I will take all of my hardware off and baggie it up. I use a piece of masking tape just to label the piece of furniture. Now, I realize I have several pieces going at once. Even if you don't, if this is the only piece you're working on, it's still a good idea to put this stuff in a safe place and label it so you know exactly what it goes to and exactly where it's at. Because a lot of times you have a lot of little screws and knobs and you don't want to lose them. This one, I have decided not to keep the hardware. I didn't like it. So I took it off and I baggied it up just to show you guys. And the reason I actually do the masking tape is so that I can remove that when I'm done and just reuse the bag. Reduce, reuse, recycle, and make sure you keep it in a safe place. Since I am not going to be using the poles that were on here, I went ahead and filled the holes. With hardware holes, just because they're deeper, I typically use Bondo. I think it dries a little harder, you have less shrinkage, it's still paintable. Personally, personal preference. I just think it's a more superior product when I'm dealing with deeper holes like that. And I don't know, I'm hoping you can see in here. If you can see in there, I will put a piece of painter's tape on the back side so that when I'm filling and pushing in the material, I'm not just going out the back side. It gives me a nice flush surface to work with. Now for this desk in particular, I did use Elmer's wood filler just as a way, I want to make sure I'm doing this with more basic products, things that you may even already have around the house. So I did use wood filler. And the one thing I will tell you about using wood filler is always just expect to use 2 coats. It tends to shrink back quite a bit, and especially when you're working with something a little deeper, you want to really make sure by the time it's all said and done you have a nice flush surface. So I filled this once and I let it dry and sanded it, but there's always that little indent there. So when I fill it the second time, I always tell people make sure it's above your surface. And by that I mean make sure it's humped up. You don't want it flush. This isn't art class, or you don't have to be perfect and graceful with this. Just really get it on there and make sure you have a little room to work with. Then when you do sand it back, you can make sure you actually sand it flush with the wood. I always say it's best if you can run your hand across it without looking at it and not tell where the hardware holes were, then you've done a pretty thorough job and you should be good to go. And then I just remove the back. I will sand the back and touch it up because a lot of times I do either stain or lacquer the interior of the drawers, especially on older pieces, because they can have stains that won't come off. Drawers take a beating, and sometimes I lacquer them, so it just depends. So you want to make sure the back side is flush as well. So now that you have taken everything off and you've repaired it and you've prepped your drawers, you are ready to sand. I have chosen not to prime this piece just because I'm going for a weathered look. So I won't be using any primer. That in itself is several videos, just because like I touched on earlier, there's so many products out there. Paint has advanced so much in the last few years that there is truly a paint and a primer for everything, every material, every circumstance, every finish that you would want to create. Again, for the purpose of keeping this simple, I'm not priming. So what I've done here is I've just taken my sandpaper, and with this one I used 100 grit. With sandpaper, the lower the number, the coarser the grit. So when you're talking about 100, 80, 60, even down to 50 and 40, you're talking about a really powerful grit of sandpaper. I typically will use 220 and then a 320 when I finish a piece, just to get that nice smooth finish. This happens to be a very old desk, and so I noticed when I was taking the drawers out and taking the hardware off that the finish was already flaking on it quite easily, so I knew I wasn't going to have to use too much to take whatever else off. You are not trying to take off the entire finish. You are not trying to remove the stain. Your goal is not to get it down to bare wood for this specific finish that I'm going for. You are just taking off the shine and scuffing up the surface. Your goal is to give the paint some tooth to stick to. It's just like anything else. It's not going to stick to anything glossy. So I've already, for the sake of time, I've already sanded quite a bit of this actually. And I really did not use much pressure. I know you can't see the pressure I'm using, but if you can see the difference in the before and the after, this is what I had started with. So there is quite a bit of gloss. You want to always make sure you go with the grain of the wood. So this curved spot was a little tricky, but without really much pressure at all, you can see that just a couple swipes of sandpaper and I'm not using a lot of pressure, mainly because I don't need to, but also because I'm not trying to gouge my wood. I want a nice smooth surface when I'm finished that will accept paint readily. But as long as you stay with the grain of the wood and just give everything a nice once over, you want that you want to be able to, when you wipe it off and look at it, that there is no gloss on your surface, there's nothing shiny left. Okay, so the piece has been thoroughly sanded and thoroughly cleaned. That's one of the areas that I'm pretty particular about, is making sure the piece is clean. There are some amazing products out there right now. Chalk paint, for one. One of the biggest perks of using chalk paint is that you do not have to prime and you do not have to sand. And I've said it before and I'll say it again and again and again. Regardless of whether you have to prime or sand, you always have to clean. It's not only just good practice, it is going to make a difference in how your paint adheres to whatever you're painting. I typically just use a gentle soap and a rag. I have used TSP before, which is a more heavy-duty multi-purpose cleaner. You can get it at the big box stores in liquid or powder form. It's great. I just don't find that I need it on some of my pieces that are really well maintained. What I did on this piece is I typically keep some old toothbrushes. I've used meat skewers, rags, scrub pads, whatever it takes to get into scalloping and detail work and cracks and crevices. When you have sanded a piece, the sanding dust will go everywhere. So it's good to have an array of tools just to get into all the cracks and crevices to make sure that wherever you apply paint, it is going to get a solid grip on the piece of furniture. I will even flip the piece over and scrub the underside of it, inside the cubbies. Anything I can reach, I'm going to scrub. Not just because it's great to have a clean piece of furniture in your home. Again, it's going to help that paint adhere. So what I've done now that everything is clean and ready to go, I've mixed up some colors. I'm going with a cream and a black. I didn't want a jet black, so I had a little fun mixing some paints. That's one thing I will say, don't be afraid to mix your paints. It's almost foolproof. Add a little this, add a little that. If it's too dark, add a little something else. There are some great places online you can find color charts and color wheels to help you if you're not the best at mixing colors. I always just say, just play and have fun. So I've mixed more of a charcoal black, I guess, maybe a really dark, I don't know if you can see that, almost black. And then I've got a cream color here. For this piece I'm using eggshell. And I tend to use more matte finishes when I'm doing weathered pieces, just because you typically don't see weathered pieces that have a lot of high gloss and shine on them. And I'm using a brush. You could use a roller. A lot of times I will use a little 4-inch foam, smooth foam roller. It makes the job go a little bit quicker, and especially if you have a lot of big flat areas, it works. For this technique, I'm actually going to use a brush just because I want a more textured, not necessarily rough, but I want some movement in the paint itself so that it looks like it's been around for a while. So I'm going to get started with this.
Okay, so something I want to mention, I know my head is cut off here, but I wanted to make sure you could see the area that we were working on. One of the things I do typically, and this might sound funny, but usually when I buy a piece of furniture, I know what I'm going to do with it. Every now and then I do get stumped, and I have found that by snapping a quick picture of the piece itself and then pulling it into my Photoshop program, I can kind of play around with the colors and text and designs and usually end up coming up with some pretty good ideas. Sometimes, like I said, it just helps to have a visual to get started with some of these. So I've got my paint, and as you can see, I've kind of already started. When I first started painting for that very distressed look, it was pretty hard for me to accomplish actually, because I'm very type A personality. So it was very hard for me to understand the concept of not perfect, because it's very, I have a tendency to want to go over the area and just make it a smooth, perfect finish. But as you can see, I'm not worried about that. I'm just coming through. I am keeping with the grain for the most part, but I'm not worried about complete coverage there. Plus I'm going to come through and distress it some more. And this would be an edge, as far as distressing goes, this would be an edge that has seen a lot of wear from somebody writing at the desk. And not only does it look more natural, it's actually going to save you from sanding later. I'm not using a lot of pressure, just some pretty light strokes actually. Now there were some nicks on this desk that I did fill in, but for the most part I left some of the scratches and the scuffs because that's just what's normally going to happen over time. So I didn't go crazy with the wood putty making things look perfect. But there you can see that the coverage is not 100%.
Okay, so we have gotten the coat of black on the desk, and I have decided that I'm going to do the drawer fronts and these cutouts on the side, the cream color. And what I'm doing, you'll notice I did not tape off my black edges for two reasons. One, we are going to do some distressing, so if you get a little bit of the cream on there, it'll wipe right off. Number two, usually if you're using a good quality brush with a nice flat head, you know, I'm using about a 2-inch brush here, you've got the perfect flat surface to get right up under here and just pulling out will cover it nicely. But I'm going through again with my brush, and I'm not really worried about being pristine or being perfect. I'm really just kind of worried about getting the paint on, and I'm kind of creating that movement in the paint with the brush, which is another, you know, again, why I didn't use the smooth foam roller. Now I'll do the same thing with this that I did with the black on the desk. I will do 2 lighter coats, and that should give us the coverage we're looking for without being on too thick, so that when we do go to do our distressing, we won't have such a hard time sanding it. Okay, so the desk has 2 coats of the black and then 2 coats of the cream. I went ahead and painted the drawer fronts the exact same way I did the side panels. Just 2 light coats, going with the grain, not being really concerned about a smooth, perfect finish. What I've decided to do with the drawers, since they were not in that great a condition, even after cleaning and giving them a light sanding, they weren't going to look good unless something was done to them. Rather than just paint them or cover them with fabric or a million other things we could do to them, I've decided to give them a whitewash. And whitewash is just watered down paint. So what I usually do, if you can see that very well, I just mix about half and half paint and water. And this is the same cream color that I used on the drawer fronts and the side panels. So one of the things you want to do when you're whitewashing is to keep rags handy, because you're going to wipe this back pretty much as soon as you put it on. And again, we're going to keep it real simple here, and we're just going to put it on. We're not worried about getting perfect paint pattern or just make sure it kind of gets on there. And as far as whitewashing goes, you can actually do this with any color of wash that you want. If you're not looking for a opaque finish, just take your paint, and the ratios are even something you can play around with too. Alright, and so then you're pretty much just going to wipe it off, and you don't need to use a lot of pressure. You're just kind of coming through. You can see how that gives it that faded out, washed away look. And you can do as many coats of this as you'd like until you get the depth of color that you're looking for. And I always like to wait at least 5 minutes or so between coats so that I'm not saturating the wood. This way I'm just getting the color on there, just because it's a very watery mixture. And I plan on doing all of the drawers on the inside and outside of the drawers like this. And I think that'll give us this a little bit more and kind of cover the little bit of stains and scarring that was there that just wasn't going to go away.